Hey everyone, Chad Frantzen with the Kingdom Finance Show, and thank you so much for being a part of today's program. I'm super excited for today's show because I'm going to share with you a concept and a strategy, what's happening in the world of business and investing that you didn't even realize it existed, and you probably didn't even realize that you need this as part of your worldview for what you're doing and running your companies, investing money for your ministries, your businesses, your families. So one of the things on the Kingdom Finance Show, you generally hear me talk a lot. And I told my wife, Kelly, I said, I get tired of talking sometimes. And there's a lot smarter people out there that I would like to start bringing on the show. And so I've got kind of some hand-selected friends in the business, in the industry. And I've got a new friend, Matt Monson. We met last couple of years and have really become fast friends in business and on the personal side. And so Matt Monson with Sovereigns Capital is our guest today. Matt, welcome to the show.
Chad, so good to be with you today. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, so Matt you're based in Denver, Colorado, and you're with Sovereigns Capital, and I'll let you explain a little bit about what that is. But Matt and I met a little over 2 years ago, I believe, at CEF. Was that correct? The Christian Economic Forum. And so before I dive in, because Matt and I we already primed the pump before we turned on record, so we were talking about all kinds of things. But please like and subscribe to the show if you have friends, colleagues who are interested in learning about how to make sense of money in the world of finance while following their values, wanting to make an impact. This is going to be a great show for you to forward along, because we're going to cover some very tangible ways that business is getting done out there in the public marketplace, while not compromising values, but actually promoting Christian values, biblical worldview, just for the benefit of human flourishing, so that people live well, whether they're Christians or not. We're called to love all people. And so really excited. So Matt, tell us a little bit, just your background at Sovereigns and the kind of work you're doing with your portfolio.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chad. So Sovereigns Capital has been around for 12 years, and we're distinct because within faith-driven investing, we only invest in companies led by faith-driven CEOs who are developing exceptional cultures to be able to love and care for their people, to really create that environment of human flourishing for their employees. And so at Sovereigns Capital, we started 12 years ago with a venture capital business. Over time, we added on a private equity business. I joined the firm to start our public equity investment business. And so you may not know that within publicly traded companies like Microsoft or Google that trade on the stock exchange, that there are some of those companies that are led by these incredible faith-driven CEOs that just have phenomenal cultures, the kind of cultures that represent the values we are for, rather than just avoiding the cultures that we find to be the most in the greatest amount of conflict with biblical values. And so we're really excited about our approach to faith-driven investing and what we're doing across multiple different asset classes.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I do want to say for listeners, we're going to talk specifically about some of the things they're doing. Please know this show's for educational purposes only. Matt and I are not giving you investment advice. If you want specific investment advice, I'm gonna tell you how to get access to that at the end of the show. But just remember, as I always tell people, this is educational in nature, but we're gonna kind of drop the plane down a little bit, Matt, right? We're gonna kind of get in the kitchen and here's some of the things that you're doing as a portfolio manager and a research analyst. And this is one of the reasons why we are working with Sovereigns Capital and Matt within our investment firm, Wealthbuilders Investments, to use some of their strategies. And I really felt like many of you follow us, you're clients that we already work with, and we're grateful for you. But this is a way for me to kind of let you in the kitchen and see how some of the recipes work, some of the strategies. So I wanted to get that out of the way, Matt, so we don't have to worry about, well, we're not giving advice. We're just sharing with you concepts that we're using in business. So Matt, one of the questions I get a lot from people is, well, exactly what you said of like, there's actually this remnant of Christian men and women in the business world that love Jesus, that follow the Bible, that actually work at large companies, because many folks will come to Billy Epperhart and I and say, I don't want to invest in the stock market. I don't want to invest in private equity. I'm just going to focus on real estate, gold and silver. And because like all those companies are corrupt and Wall Street's corrupt and there's just I don't want to support it. And so you're saying there's actually a subset of Fortune 500 companies, whatever, the top 3,000 companies out there that actually follow Christian values and are profitable, well-run businesses.
Absolutely. So if you zoom out for a moment and frame the space, there's about 3,000 publicly traded companies in the United States that make up about 98% of the market capitalization of public companies in the United States. Those are all in the index, the Russell 3000. And so out of that index, we found about 350 publicly traded companies in the United States listed on NASDAQ or NYSE that are run by faith-driven CEOs with these really exceptional cultures. And those companies break down, as you might expect, you find believers across the whole spectrum. So those companies are those CEOs are in small cap, mid cap, and large cap companies. They're across all industries, and they're found in both these, value and growth companies. And so you're able to, to build a portfolio that really captures a really broad snapshot of the U.S. public equity markets.
Yeah. Which is incredible. And I think intuitively, if we step back from everything going on in media and politics and all the craziness out there, like, well, of course, there's always going to be a remnant. There's always going to be people in your community, on your kid's baseball team, right? Or at the grocery store working that are followers of Jesus. I think sometimes we get so depressed with the media and the news. We're like, oh my gosh, it's, it's like Elijah, he's like, thinks he's the only prophet left and there's no one else. But I've been encouraged in getting to know Matt and his team, because we're not alone in what we're doing at Wealthbuilders Investments. And so there is, even within our industry, Matt, there's this, I think, seems to be a growing number of companies like Sovereigns and Wealthbuilders Investments that's really wants to focus on what Billy and I call pro values and impact, not just negative screening, right? Not just saying, hey, I'm not going to support abortion. I'm not going to support companies that their supply chain is connected to human trafficking or marijuana. But maybe let's talk about that a little bit, and we'll dive deeper into some of the work you're doing. But when we talk about faith-driven investing, and I know you all have done a ton of work on that, maybe let's just talk about, what does that mean? What's it look like in the past? What is it starting to look like now? You guys have been the forerunners on that with some of your colleagues. So let me share a little bit on that.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I appreciate the compliment that we're some of the forerunners. I also think that there are plenty of different companies who have come before us, who have built the space, who've done a wonderful job, and we're just one of many out there. We think that we've created something unique, but we certainly weren't the first to it. Faith-driven investing has been around for about 300 years, and it was founded on negative screening. And as you mentioned, negative screening often means, hey, let's avoid 5 different industries that come into conflict with biblical values. Those industries are often, the 5 key ones are tobacco, alcohol, gaming, abortion, and pornography. And we don't want our investment portfolio to grow and to profit if those activities grow and profit. So we avoid those companies. But it takes us about 1% of our time to make sure that we avoid companies that are involved in those industries. We spend 99% of our time actually looking for that needle in a haystack, looking for that company that's run by a faith-driven CEO with an exceptional culture. And there is no list that you can download. There's no database. I get asked that question all the time. People say, well, which software program did you buy to download those? Well, we didn't. What we did was we asked men and women like you listening to the program, who do you go to church with? Who's in your small groups? Who do you know in your community that's a faith-driven CEO of a public company? Over time, our network grew and we learned about more and more of them. And so now we're up to 350 of them that we found. And as you mentioned, Chad, I mean, these are public company CEOs. They're held to account in terms of generating profits and running a business in a really and so you're not giving up anything in terms of the excellence. In fact, you're getting excellence and you're getting culture all at the same time. And we can talk more about that in a minute, just in terms of what we see the results of the cultural inputs on the front end in terms of the business performance on the back end.
Mm-hmm. Well, what percentage of what we've talked about this before, but when we look at like people in the investment world for a career, right? Like whether they're financial analysts, advisors, planners, asset managers, CFOs, like what percentage of our group is actually implementing some type of a faith-driven policy statement or philosophy?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. The answer is really, really small, and I'll give you some reasons why. First of all, most Christians that I've met, whether they're in the investment industry as a financial advisor, or whether they're just an individual who's stewarding their own capital, or they have a financial advisor, most Christians aren't even aware that faith-driven investing is an option. Once people become aware, I think you can't unsee it, and you're oftentimes drawn towards it. However, within that scope, there are different options, right? I laid out there are negative screening options, and then there are other players out there in the space that do negative screening as just the framework for their basis, but then they do positive screening on top of it, which is where they're spending 99% of their time. And I think once you start to get exposed to that and you say, wait, I can actually show the world what I'm for. I can align my investment portfolio with my personal values. My shares will be voted in line with my values rather than some other fund manager who's going to hijack the shares and vote them in line with their values, which could be in conflict with biblical values. So now I get to own the companies that reflect my values. My shares will be voted in line. And then we can talk about this in a minute, but then we can take the next step and we can bring these companies together to meet with one another, to adopt best practice from each other and do even more than they were yesterday. I think that's really where faith-driven investing is going.
Well, that's incredible. And I know, you've done some research on this, but a lot of people that come to us on our investment company side will say something like, well, I want to incorporate this, but I don't want to have poor performance. I don't want to reduce my returns because I own Google, Microsoft, Apple. I own a lot of the big names that primarily drive the S&P 500. And I think, that's really becoming a myth, right? We've got enough research now, and maybe this can kind of springboard us into some of your work, but I get that all the time from individual investors, and they say, well, I feel like I'm going to be giving up stuff. I'd rather go profit from those companies and then use that profit to go give to my church or give to an orphanage or my local community or whatever. What's your take on that?
So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I don't think that there's any one right answer that everyone needs to follow. And so first, let's say if someone really feels compelled to own the Magnificent Seven, I'll refer to that term a couple different times. It's the 7 large technology stocks that have driven almost all of the returns in the market over the last couple of years. And it includes Amazon, NVIDIA, Google, others. If someone feels like they really want to hold on to those, what you can do is you can dip your toe in the water by starting to move your portfolio. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 50% into faith-driven investing to start to get a feel for it. I think sometimes people say, well, gosh, I just need to sell everything I own and move it all over, and that seems too hard. And so they don't take action. And so I want to encourage people to take one step in the direction that you feel like you're called into, and then you can figure it out as you go. Now, however, addressing your other point that you made about the trade-off between impact and performance, this is one of my favorite things to cover with people because I think it's so surprising. It's intuitive, but it's also surprising at the same time. So let's unpack the paradigm. We have companies that had really high, I'll give you an example of one. LCI, led by CEO Jason Lippert. This is one of our core holdings across all of our public equity strategies. They had 130% employee turnover. What that means is that out of their 8,000 plus employees 10 years ago, more than or 130% of those employees were quitting every year. That created an enormous strain on the organization to be hiring and recruiting and training those people every year. So Jason looked at the organization, he prayed about it, he went on a listening tour, and he realized that there was a number of different things that were kind of wrong with how people were being treated. Some of them were as simple as the bathrooms were out of paper halfway through the day every day. So he thought, well, gosh, that's simple. We can just have the janitors come through more frequently and keep the bathrooms stocked with paper. He learned other things, though, along that listening tour around leadership that was, maybe not acting and treating employees the right way. And so what he did was he not only fixed those pieces of, let's call it the low-hanging fruit, but then he went on offense. And he installed programs, many different programs. One of my favorite is his Dream Achievers program, where he hired pastors and sports coaches to sit down with his employees and to ask them what their dreams are. Employees said things as simple as, I want to quit tobacco and I want to lose 20 pounds, to more complex around, I want to restore a broken relationship with a spouse or a child. And just having coaches and accountability partners helping those employees achieve their dreams, which is something they write about in their 10K, by the way. So this is not a secret. By helping these employees achieve their dreams, the employee turnover metrics at his company improved from 130% 10 years ago to now just under 30% at the company. It's phenomenal, the improvement that they've seen. So you can, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to guess that the business performance also improved dramatically. Top line revenue growth, margins. I mean, when you have people that are sticking around for years on end instead of 9 months, you now have better innovation, safety, productivity. And so using that just as an example, like a little springboard example, I could go on and on about that company, but we see those same things across a larger set of companies that we invest in, led by faith-driven CEOs. I'll just give you one last data point. The first public equity fund that we launched is called the Omega Fund, the Sovereign's Capital Omega Fund. It's in year 3 right now of its track record. And over the first 2+ years from when we launched it through the end of the quarter on March 31st, the fund is up 31% net of all fees compared to the market. We define the market as the Russell 3000, which was up 22%. 31% for the Omega Fund versus 22%. And inside the Omega Fund, notably, we don't invest in any of those magnificent 7 companies. We don't own the technology companies that drove 35% of the stock market return over the last 2+ years. And so not owning the key companies that drove the stock market, forming the market, it just starts to paint a picture that when you do it the Lord's way, that when you focus on the inputs of team and culture and loving on people, you end up with business metrics such as higher employee retention, which then leads to financial performance, which we've seen in the Omega Fund.
Yeah, that really brings that all together, right? When you look at what some of these, like what Jason's doing there, I mean, that is, what a call to action. So when you started building your portfolio, maybe let's share a little more of that. Like, I know Sovereign's Capital, when I first met him, does a lot of work in the private markets, what we call venture capital market, with their investing kind of thesis or philosophy. And then, really they went out and found you and said, hey, let's see. You really had a heart for wanting to do this work in the public market, like we talked about the Russell 3000 in the US. Maybe talk about the genesis of that, and then you now have an ETF, and kind of what you're doing with that work of those 350 companies and how that whole process gets whittled down into a portfolio.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that. If I don't know if you asked this question exactly, but, for me, my personal journey, I had been investing for about 15 years. before joining Sovereign's Capital. And there was a moment in my life where I said, gosh, I wish I could find a better way to integrate faith and work. And I'm not sure what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I prayed about it with my wife. And the next day, she went to a park. At the time, we were living in Connecticut, and one of our children ran circles around a stranger talking on a cell phone. And what that guy said on his phone when my wife ran over there to retrieve that child was, he said, Christian private equity fund, Sovereign's Capital. And my wife said all the hair on her arms and neck stood up, and it felt like getting struck by lightning. And she came home and she said, I got the direct answer to the prayer we prayed last night. And so I was thrilled to meet the team over at Sovereign's Capital. They had a dream of launching a public equity division. I didn't join that firm, for 3+ years. But all in the Lord's timing, they said, we've been growing, we've been building out different asset classes. Our thesis of investing in companies led by faith-driven CEOs has played out in multiple different asset classes, and we want to build it out in public equities. You asked, Chad, why public equities? Public equities is the largest slice of most individuals and institutions' capital allocation pie. And so what we did was we set out to leverage all of our learnings in the private markets, in venture capital and private equity, to bring them into public equity, because that way we could serve people in their biggest slice of their pie. We first launched the Omega Fund, which is a fund targeted towards individuals, family offices, and institutions. And that was a bit of a testing ground. And the thesis really played out exactly as we had hoped it would for the Omega Fund. And so then, as you mentioned, Chad, we launched an ETF about 8 months ago on the New York Stock Exchange called the Sovereign's Capital Flourish Fund ETF. It's got its own website, which is scetfs.com, where we've got a number of different videos and stories around what this looks like. But we brought that to market. It's the only thing that Sovereign's Capital has done over the last 12 years that's accessible to every individual in America. There are no thresholds. Most of our other products, as you would imagine, because they're based in venture capital and private equity, they're typically targeted more towards institutions than they are individuals. And so we're thrilled to be able to bring the ETF to market and to really serve people where they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's incredible. And one of the things we've started at Wealthbuilders Investments talking to our clients about is we're internally building a model, an equity model. And of course, everything's based on suitability, and we're not here to give advice, but we're actually using Matt's strategy as one of our core holdings in the portfolio we're designing internally. So Matt came to one of our events that Billy and I had done, and I had several people afterwards reach out to me and say, "Hey, how do I get a hold of that Matt guy? I want to invest in what he's doing." And I'm like, "Well, settle down. Like we're using Matt inside of what we're doing. Like you already get access to him." So, and that's a key part of our role is just, and that's why I wanted you on the show was, how do we go do our research as a company and find people like you and Sovereigns where there's a really good fit, values wise, and how we want to take care of clients within their best interest. And so to fit that in there. So that'll probably be a common question people from the show will ask, but just know, I think you're liking what you're hearing, and I'm going to have Matt keep going, but this is why we are putting his strategy inside of our model, because, as Billy shared with me years ago, we want to do more than just negatively screen something. And there's a lot of good asset managers that do that we know, but I think there's this niche that you and I are on the cusp of if we can really focus on companies that are led by, kind of like these Josephs in Egypt or these Daniels in Babylon, where nothing's black and white anymore, right? Like there might be a company that people would think, Matt, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that the average person would say that company is so terrible. But then you go up the tower and you see that they have a extremely faith-driven, Jesus-loving CEO or CFO, and you're like, oh wait, maybe they're up there trying to make a difference. And I call it being at the top of the gates, Matt. So Lance Wallnau talks about the 7 spheres of culture. So whether it's church or academia or government or business, to media, but when we talk about our investing dollars, if we can invest our dollars towards the top of the mountain where the leaders and people of influence are, to your point, and you've got some cool stories on some work you're doing, if we can get up there at the gates of influence, which that's where the Josephs and the Daniels and the Esthers were, right? Then, and God put them there, then when that money gets deployed, then it's going to have a far-reaching impact. And so I want to use that to talk about, just any stories you want to share. He's told me some really cool things off air that you're doing in the portfolio, and whether it's your roundtables or your research. I mean, what are some examples of that?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I love the illustration and just visualizing what it looks like to be allocating capital to the top of the mountaintop. You guys do such a wonderful job of leading with this pro values framework, and there's just so few who are thinking about investing in that way in the marketplace. So we love that. You mentioned our roundtables that we host. So I laid out that what we do is we invest in companies that we believe are the best of the best in terms of representing Christian values in the marketplace. And what that looks like in practice is loving and caring for every employee on your team in a way that that person walks home and says, I've never worked for someone like this in my life. I'm having the best experience I've ever had. And so what we do is not only align our capital with those companies in line with biblical principles on those proxies, but we are building relationships with the CEOs of these companies, and we bring them together in roundtables to meet one another and to hear about best practices from one another. So you asked this question at a timely moment, because just last week on Wednesday, May 29th in Chicago, we hosted a CEO roundtable. And so it was all public company CEOs from our portfolio. There was 6 of them in attendance, and together they had 250,000 team members represented by their companies. And so we spent 6 hours together in person, and each person got to walk through their story and outline the unique culture that they built at their company. And we cue them ahead of time to say, tell us what the impact was on employees after you did those specific cultural things. And then tell us what the impact was on your financials. Because what we know is that when you love and care for people, they do better work. And if they do better work and your financial condition improves, then there's no trade-off. It serves employees and shareholders alike. And so in those roundtables, they come out of these roundtables towards the end, we say, well, what are you going to act on? What do you think is the lowest hanging fruit here? And people repeat everything they've heard. We're going to install care teams, which are counselors on site, because they really help employees walk through the struggles they're dealing with in life. We're going to install employee benevolence funds. We're going to improve HR benefits. We're going to install a servant leadership orientation to our company, because it'll govern the fabric of how employees treat one another and how they treat customers alike. And so we just are so thrilled to be at the forefront of what's going on here. We can't take any credit for it. This is something the Lord was doing before we ever met these CEOs. We're just setting the table, and they come and they share stories with one another, and they adopt best practices from one another. And so if ever one CEO adopts one thing, we're talking about what could be an impact on 10,000+ employees for years and years to come, which is so much greater impact than if you go to a soup kitchen and serve a meal and all those people are hungry 4 hours later. So we're just thrilled to be able to be used by him and what he's doing in the marketplace through these public companies.
Yeah. So you've gotten really great response from those CEOs. And I know you've got some in that group that have kind of pioneered some of this. I mean, they've got track record on what they've been doing in their companies, like the example you gave. And I think, I mean, the genius of that to me is it's bringing the peer-to-peer, collaboration, just the fellowship there, peer-to-peer, because, me going to CEO and saying, hey, you need to do this, Mr. and Mrs. CEO. But if it's another CEO that's saying, hey, we've been doing this and look at what's happening internally at our employees and financially, right? I mean, at the end of the day, these are for-profit businesses and not ministries, but it really proves the point to me that so much of, Jesus did a lot of his work outside of the synagogue. Like a lot of his healing, a lot of his ministry was done outside of what we would call the church, right? So this is, hopefully encouraging for a lot of you listening that are business owners, small business owners, entrepreneurs, right? That there's an amazing amount of impact that's happening all around us, and you're a part of that too. What are some other things in the portfolio, the strategy that you'd like to share, Matt, as we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, thanks for that. We really have a grand vision here that as CEOs start to learn from one another, that the more you pour yourself into team and the more you also get business performance. We'd love to see a shift in public companies across all of America. I mean, Billy Graham said the next revival is going to be in the marketplace. And,
Right.
if it's us and 500 others that are helping kind of shape and lead that movement, we would just love to start seeing public company CEOs lean into culture, lean into human flourishing and caring for employees in unique and radical ways.
Yeah, I mean, you think about even, at times, things feel really dark out there in the marketplace and media and politics, but there are so many people, both in the private small business market and in the public space, that, really do have the influence. They're, at the top of these gates of influence. And so I think even for us, not only if we know about them, do we pray for them, but how can we come alongside them to help them, and I'm sure some of these CEOs probably have boards that are a little more liberal, a little more left leaning, right? That's just today's culture. And yet we're not going to say, hey, we're not going to invest in your company because 6 of your board members are super left leaning. And, but I think that's just a key point for the listener. And what I've learned from you is, well, things are not always what they seem, right? I mean, you're finding like these 350 companies, and they need help, right? I mean, you're really adding value in these roundtables to where I'm curious to see, like 3 years from now, if they go back and measure, what's going to be some of these metrics of how much they've improved employee retention, or some of these other items of when they do these assessments of employees. And I think that has to lead to more profitability. And if they're looking to hire leaders to come be at their company from competitors, don't you think those other leaders are saying, hey, this is a lot better shop to work for because they care for me?
Yeah, man, you just said so many good things. I could comment on each one of them. I won't, for the sake of time, but Chad, you're not perfect, and neither am I, and no public company and no public company leader is perfect either. And so what we've done is we've found, what we believe are the leaders who have such a heart activation for the Lord, and who are taking public companies that were maybe doing things that you and I wouldn't have loved 5 years ago, and they're unwinding some of that. They're changing some of that, and they're doing it through the lens of what it looks like to love on your people. And so I haven't found a single human in my entire life who doesn't want to be served, loved, and cared for. And so when you set up a company with a faith-driven CEO to have an exceptional culture, if that culture looks like love, care, and service, that culture is going to be attractive to every single person in America.
Yeah. It's that servant leadership that you talked about, right? I mean, that you don't have to be a professing Christian to appreciate servant leadership, right? I mean, and going, the golden rule, right? To go the extra mile. I mean, that's not, so I think that's a beautiful way to capture that. Well, let me wrap up with a couple of things. I have a couple of questions I want to ask you, Matt, that aren't related to the portfolio. But so as I'm doing these interviews, I'm going to ask these two questions to everybody that comes on. But before I do that, I want to let people know, if you want to learn more about, hey, I really like this concept, and I know we kind of time went quick here, but if you want to learn more about what Matt's doing, how we're incorporating this in our portfolios, I want you to reach out to us. I'm going to give you this website. It's wealthbuilders.net/invest. So wealthbuilders.net/invest. we've got a free resource for you on pro values investing that we'll send to you. And then if you're already working with us, or if you're not, you're just a listener, if you want to learn more about, hey, how do I get these kind of companies inside of my 401k, inside of my IRA, inside of my kids' college savings account, reach out to us, because that is a large part of what we're doing at Wealthbuilders Investments, is really trying to raise awareness for folks of, hey, this is out here and this is really cool. This is the way this strategy works, is we're investing in really meaningful public companies that have faith-driven leaders at the top. And so I want to encourage each of you to consider how that fits in your financial plan. And so in order to do that, please connect with us. And if you're already a client of Wealthbuilders Investments, just know this is one of the strategies that we're highlighting that's inside of the portfolio. So with that, Matt, I want to ask you two questions since you're on the hot seat. Super easy, but just for our listeners, like outside of the Bible, what's one of your favorite books, most impactful books that you've been reading this year or that you're reading currently?
I've met a lot of people, and I live in Colorado, and I really like the wild, and I get a lot of book recommendations. I don't have time to read them all, but I had so many people recommend to me to read Wild at Heart that I said, gosh, if all these people recommended the same book, maybe that's one book I actually got to read. And so I've been enjoying that one this year. That's
a great book. Yeah, John Eldridge. I read that years ago. It was super impactful. So that's a great one. Okay. All right. Question number 2 on the hot seat. What's the best advice you've received, or one of the best pieces of advice or wisdom that you've received just in your working career that might be helpful for other people listening?
Yeah. One of the things I tell young people when I meet them and they're asking for career advice is I tell them, maybe follow a person instead of a title or a company or a seat. And it's because if you get to work for a guy who aligns with, or guy or girl who aligns with your values, it doesn't really matter what company you work for, because the person that you spend all your time with is what's more important.
Man, that's really good. That's some good advice. And I know we've got a lot of listeners, young and old, and people that are, I get that question a lot from people of just, career advice, how to run my company, and, or how to ascend into a company. And you're right, though. Titles mean very little. I mean, it's really just being around like people you can view as a mentor that you can learn from for a season, right? And maybe it gives you the trajectory for where you end up going. So, well, Matt, this has been powerful. I won't ask any more hot seat questions. I appreciate that. And I really enjoyed having you here on the Kingdom Finance Show. And man, I know I'm going to get really good feedback on this, because the work you guys are doing is so impactful. And I'm really honored to be working with you and your team, because I think the more we can collaborate together, the more impact we have. So thanks so much for being here, Matt, and we will see everyone next time on the Kingdom Finance Show.
Thank you so much for joining me today on the Kingdom Finance Show. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps to get the word out. For more resources on becoming a Kingdom investor and to connect with us directly, visit our website at wealthbuilders.net. That's wealthbuilders.net. We'll see you next time on the Kingdom Finance Show. The content provided is for educational purposes only. We encourage you to seek personalized investment advice from your financial professional. For all tax and legal advice, please consult your CPA or attorney. Investment advisory services are offered through Authentic Counsel, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer of securities. Offerings can only be made through an offering memorandum, and you should carefully examine risk factors and other information contained in the memorandum.